All right, so we have pretty much completed the section where we defined our supply side and our demand side and all the things that affect, both sides of our market. We're now going to go through defining our recessionary graph and our inflationary graph. So in order to do that, we would need to go through something called our potential GDP, which I think we kind of touched upon that. So I just want to define our full potential output, okay? So our capacity or our full potential output, and you have seen this before, which is our Y star, which is, remember, dictated by our long run supply curve. So remember, the level of real GDP when all our resources are fully employed is defined as our full potential output, okay, or our Y star. One thing to note here, when we're talking about all our resources being fully employed, so we're talking about our factors of production, our land, labor, capital being fully employed, that means that all our factors of production are employed at what we call their normal capacity of utilization. Normal capacity of utilization, I would say, is probably different in different countries because normal capacity of utilization, especially like, for example, for labor, will have to do with, what is full employment labor, okay? Well, in Canada, full employment for labor is 37.5 hours to 40 hours. So if you're working in China, 37.5 to 40 hours is not considered full-time. So we're talking about, policies and legislation in Canada. Also, normal capacity of utilization sometimes is dictated based on the type of equipment you're using. So if you work in a large factory and you have these large, manufacturing machines, well, most machines you cannot operate for 24 hours of the day. The machine starts to break down, things starts to go wrong, and they're going to need to be fixed. So when we're talking about the normal capacity of utilization, we're not talking about working your resources 100%. We're talking about working your resources based on legislation in that country and, different specifications by the manufacturer. Okay, so there are some machines that you should really only run for 8 hours of the day and no more. So that is what we're talking about. And normal capacity of utilization means that we're talking about full employment, which means that we're not talking about overtime. There's no overtime. And we're not talking about underemployment. We're talking about what the output that an economy can produce when all factors are employed at their normal capacity, okay? So this is just a graph based on what we have here. Our blue line is potential. This is how much output we should be producing. And our pink line is the output that we are actually producing. So just because we have full, our GDP of full employment, how much, given all the resources that we have, all our land, labor, capital, how much GDP we should be producing, oftentimes, as you see in this graph, the economy doesn't always follow and end up producing where we should be. So this just gives you an idea in terms of 1947 1993. The red line is our capacity or our full potential, okay? And the black line here is our actual output. So you can see that anytime our output is above our Y star, we are producing more than the economy should be producing. Okay, we call that an inflationary gap. And at other points, you see that the economy is producing below Y star, and that means that the economy has a certain level of unemployment or underemployment because we're not producing as much output as we should. So now what we're moving into is something called our output gap or our GDP gap. And this is a model that we use when we are there to illustrate the ideas of inflation and recession. Okay, so I just want to go through just an illustration here. Okay, so we have our price level, we have our Y real GDP, and I just want to define something that we haven't really talked about yet, and that's something called our short run equilibrium and our long run equilibrium. Our short run equilibrium is just the intersection of our short run supply curve and our aggregate demand curve. So our short run supply curve and our aggregate demand curve defines current output. Okay, so our short run supply curve and our air demand, where they intersect, will define our output, our current output today. We have our price level at P0, and we have our Y0 of our current output. Now, our long run supply curve dictates where the economy should be producing. So if our long run supply curve sits to the right of our short run equilibrium, this would be our recessionary gap, because the economy should be producing Y star, but instead it's producing Y0. So that means that there must be a certain level of unemployment or underemployment. So there must be people that want to work that's not getting all their hours, or they've just been laid off completely. You will probably see excess capacity in a manufacturing facility. So let's say you have a business with 4 machines, but only 3 of them are working, and you have 1 sitting there idle because there's just not enough demand in the economy to have all 4 machines running. Or you might have an office building where there's a few, where 20% of the desks are empty because there's been, a 20% layoff in that company. So this is a situation where we are dealing with a recessionary scenario where your current output is less than your Y star. So let's take a look at an inflationary gap. So once again, we have our price level, we have our Y real GDP. So once again, our current output is dictated by our short run equilibrium of the intersection of our AD and our short run supply curve. So once again, I'm going to call that Y0 and P0. But this time we have our long run supply curve sitting to the left of our Y0 right here. So in this situation, our current output is greater than our full potential. So that just kind of tells you that right now in our economy, we are producing more than we should. So this would be a situation where people are probably working a lot of overtime. Machines that should only be running 8 hours a day are probably running 12 hours a day. Okay. You might have an office building where, you know, you have more desks crammed in there than there should be. So this is a situation where we are dealing with an inflationary scenario. So anytime our current output is greater than our current output, we are talking about an inflationary gap. Okay. Now, of course, the best scenario in economics is where we are producing at full potential. So the ideal situation is where our long run supply curve and our short run equilibrium all meet. So this is the most ideal, but also there is a name for this, and we call this our long run equilibrium. So our long run equilibrium is basically where our short run supply curve, our long run supply curve, and our AD curve all meet, okay? So this is the most ideal situation. All right, so pretty much I have gone through this stuff, so I hope that it makes sense here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to finish off with inflation, because now we're able to graph the causes of inflation. So I just want to go through the exercise of graphing this out for you guys. There are two reasons that inflation exists. One is an increase in our demand curve when we are at full potential. And there is the other reason, and it would be a decrease in our supply curve when we are at full potential. So let's just work this out. Okay, so let's go through our demand pull inflation. So demand pull inflation, remember, is an increase of the demand curve that pushes past our Y star. So we're going to start off with our long run equilibrium. Wow, that's really crooked there. So we have our price level, we have our Y real GDP, and we're going to start off with our long run equilibrium. Whoops. Okay, so we are at our long run equilibrium of P star and Y star. And let's say something happens, and let's say there's an increase in consumption spending, which then increases our AD. Okay, we have, you know, exorbitant, you know, optimism in the economy, and everybody's spending like crazy, and our demand curve shifts to the right. So our demand curve shifts to the right. Okay, so we have our AD0 and AD1. So now what happens? Well, you're going to see that now the economy is operating at a point that is above our Y star. So this would be an example of demand pull inflation. Now let's go through our cost push inflation. So let's just once again go through our long run equilibrium. Start off with that. So we have our AD, short run supply curve, long run supply curve. Y star, P star. So now cost push inflation is caused by a leftward shift of our supply curve. So what could cause that? Well, let's say that there is an increase in wages. Okay, wages, globally or nationally. So if there's an increase in wages, that affects the cost of production. If that is the case, then you would expect our supply curve to decrease, and a decrease in supply curve will shift our supply curve. So let's just go with our SAS0, and then our supply curve will shift to the left, SAS1. So now what we see here is we have our Y0 being less than our Y star and our P0 being above our P star. So just in terms of what we have caused here, this is a very bad situation, okay? So what you have seen here is that your short run supply curve has shifted to the left. We have caused a decrease of output. So output has decreased from Y star to Y0. And at the same time, prices have increased, okay? So when you see a decline in output and an increase in price level, this is what we call stagflation. So stagflation is a combination of unemployment, so a decline in Y, okay, or should I call it a decline in Y from Y star to Y0. So that is, we call that unemployment or recession. And we are combining that with an increase in price from P star to P0. So we call that inflation. Actually, I'm going to make that red. So unemployment slash recession. So stagflation is a combination of unemployment or recession and inflation happening at the same time. So it is a very nasty situation. It is very hard to get out of because any type of policies usually only make things worse. And for the economy to self-correct back to our long-run equilibrium, it takes a long time, and there is a lot of collateral damage that happens if we were to allow the economy to self-correct. So this is the end of this lecture, and I hope that this stuff makes sense. And once again, if you have any questions regarding this lecture, please ask me questions during my office hours. Okay, have a good day.